When Dad died, my stepmother thought she'd finally won. 5 years of silence, and suddenly I wasn't family enough to be invited to the will reading. But Dad, he was always 3 steps ahead. The look on Diana's face when I laid those property deeds on the lawyer's table? Absolutely priceless. This meeting is for heirs only, the attorney said sternly. I smiled and spread the documents wide. You mean the properties I already own? But let me back up and tell you how it all unfolded. Before we dive into this wild inheritance story, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. If you're into family drama, betrayal, and the ultimate revenge twist, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. It all started on a rainy Tuesday morning in Singapore. I was in the middle of finalizing a major real estate development deal when my phone rang. A number I hadn't seen in years. It was Grace, my childhood friend. Her voice cracked as she gave me the news. Maxwell, your father passed away last night. It had been 5 years since I'd set foot in Maplewood. 5 years since the fight with my father that ended in silence. 5 years since I boarded a flight to Asia, determined to make my name in global real estate. Now I was going home not as a prodigal son, but as a stranger in grief. The taxi pulled up in front of the Victorian house where I grew up. The basketball hoop Dad installed for my 10th birthday was still there. The porch swing where we'd talked late into summer nights. The rose garden where we buried Mom. Everything looked smaller now. Maybe it was just the weight of time, or maybe the weight of coming back. Diana's silver Mercedes sat in the driveway, next to 2 unfamiliar luxury cars. Dad always drove his old Cadillac. Practical, unflashy, honest like him. I grabbed my suitcase and stepped up to the house. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened. Brittany, my stepsister, face like a porcelain mask, emotionless but polished. Maxwell, she said flatly. We weren't sure you'd come. He was my father, I said, letting the words hang in the air. She stepped aside. No hug, no offer to take my bag, just a silent signal. You're not welcome here. Inside, the house was unrecognizable. Diana had erased every trace of Dad's warm, rustic style. Gone were the leather chairs and oak cabinets. Now everything was glass, chrome, and cold silence. Mother's in the living room with Tyler and some guests, Brittany said, still no warmth in her voice. I followed her down the hallway. There she was, Diana, perched like royalty on a white leather couch, surrounded by local townspeople I vaguely remembered. Her painted expression cracked for just a second when she saw me. Then, it reset into a perfectly measured look of performative grief. Maxwell, she said, rising to air kiss my cheek. What a surprise. We tried reaching you, of course. Your number must have changed. It hadn't. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, cold and formal, because I already knew we were about to play a very old, very fake game. When is the funeral? I asked. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Tyler cut in, not bothering to look up. We've handled all the arrangements. Translation: stay out of the way. Diana gave me a tight smile. Your old room's being used for storage, but we can put you in the guest room. That was the moment I knew exactly what they thought of me. They believed they had buried more than just my father. They thought they'd buried me too. But what they didn't know, Dad and I weren't finished. Not yet. I nodded, suddenly desperate to escape the weight of hostile stares. I think I'll just get settled, I said, turning to go. Diana's voice followed me, syrupy sweet with poison underneath. Harold Stevenson is handling the estate matters, she called out. He'll be by in the morning to go over the paperwork. Family only, you understand? I understood perfectly. It wasn't an invitation, it was a lockout. I wasn't just being excluded from the reading of the will, I was being erased. Later that evening, Grace found me out on the back porch, sitting beneath the massive oak tree where Dad and I had built a tree house when I was 8. The wood was rotting now, but I could still see the initials we'd carved into the trunk. They've been awful, Max, she said, lowering herself beside me. Ever since your dad got sick, it's like they've already claimed everything. Diana's been meeting with developers, whispering about selling off half the town. Grace had grown up next door and still ran her family's hardware store downtown. Unlike me, she'd stayed rooted in Maplewood, and she'd seen everything I'd missed. Did you know your dad asked about you? She added softly. All the time. He kept your magazine features in a drawer in his office. He was proud. Max, a knot tightened in my chest. His office. Is it still there? I asked, hopeful. Grace hesitated, then looked down. Diana cleared it out last week, locked the door, boxed everything up, sent it to storage. Of course she had. I thanked Grace and went inside, my mind racing. The guest room was exactly what I expected. Cold, impersonal, sterile. No trace of the years I'd lived there. Not a single photograph, not a book, nothing. As I unpacked, I heard voices in the hallway. Once Harold confirms the will tomorrow, we can move forward with the Riverside property sale, Diana was saying, casual and confident. Lawrence already made an offer. What about Maxwell? Tyler asked, his voice low. Think he'll cause problems? Diana laughed a short, sharp sound. What can he do? Richard left everything to us. Maxwell made his choice. The day he walked out and abandoned his father, my jaw clenched. My hands were shaking. Abandoned? I had called for months. I left voicemails, emails, letters. Every time, Diana answered and said he was too busy or didn't want to talk. Eventually, I gave up, and I'd carried the guilt ever since. That night, restless and unable to sleep, I wandered through the darkened house. In the library, most of the shelves had been gutted, but a few of my old books remained. I reached for one, the Count of Monte Cristo. It had been a gift from Dad on my 16th birthday. Inside the cover, I found his familiar handwriting. To Maxwell, remember that patience and planning always win in the end. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, something slipped out and landed at my feet. An envelope? Inside was a letter dated just 3 months ago in my father's unmistakable hand. Maxwell, if you're reading this, I'm likely gone. Diana doesn't know about this letter or the arrangements I've made. There's a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. The key is taped to the back of the Monte Cristo painting in my office. Whatever you may think of me, know that I always had a plan. Dad, my heart pounded. The office was locked just like Grace had said, but I remembered the loose floorboard in the hallway. Dad had kept a spare key there for years. Some habits die hard. Sure enough, the key was still there. Inside the office, the room had been stripped of life. No photos, no files, no sign of the man who once filled it with big dreams and bigger ideas. But the painting still hung on the wall. Carefully, I lifted it down, and there it was taped to the back just like Dad said. A small brass key. I stared at it, the weight of it suddenly immense in my hand. Tomorrow, I'd go to the bank, and then to Harold Stevenson's office. Because whatever Diana thought she had locked up and claimed for herself, she didn't know Dad. And she didn't know me. While other kids were learning to throw a ball, my father was teaching me how to calculate property values and spot a faulty foundation from 100 yards away. When Mom died of cancer, I was just 10. For 3 years, it was Dad and me against the world. We were a team, tight-knit and inseparable. He was grooming me to one day take over Harrison Properties, and I absorbed every lesson like gospel. Then Diana Winters entered our lives. She was radiant, charming in that effortless way, and for a time, she seemed to genuinely care for Dad. I was 13 when they married, old enough to feel cautious, but still young enough to hope this could be a new beginning. She came with 2 children from her previous marriage, Brittany, my age, and Tyler, 2 years younger. At first, things were fine, not warm, but civil. Diana made Dad happy, and for me, that was enough. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, everything began to shift. My seat at the dinner table edged further from Dad. Our weekend property tours were replaced by Tyler's soccer games and Brittany's dance recitals. Diana began redecorating the house, stripping it of every trace of my mother room by room. You need to give them a chance, Maxwell, Dad would say when I complained. They're family now. By 16, I had become a guest in my own home. Diana had inserted herself as Dad's business confidant, tagging along to meetings I once attended. Tyler, who had never shown the slightest interest in real estate, suddenly wanted to learn, and Dad was thrilled. Still, Dad and I clung to our bond through work. Harrison Properties was his life's masterpiece. It started with one small apartment building bought with my mother's savings. By the time I was in college, it had become a regional empire, owning nearly 30% of Maplewood's commercial real estate. Property is permanence, Maxwell, he used to say. Money comes and goes, but land endures. I carried those words with me. I studied business and real estate development in college, working summers at the company. I knew the business from the inside out: maintenance, leasing, zoning, you name it. By graduation, I was ready to lead. That's when everything unraveled. Dad and I had been working on his dream project, a riverfront redevelopment to breathe life back into downtown Maplewood. We'd spent months sketching plans, debating ideas. I even traveled to other cities to study similar projects. But when I returned, everything had changed. I thought a more upscale approach would yield better returns, Dad told me when I confronted him. Diana agrees. Luxury condos are what the market wants. That's not the vision, I argued. We wanted something for everyone, a mix of housing and community spaces. Sometimes you have to be practical, he said. Diana has excellent instincts for these things. What followed was less a conversation than a reckoning. Years of bottled up resentment poured out. I accused him of selling out, of letting Diana rewrite our legacy. He accused me of being idealistic, inflexible, immature. Maybe you're not ready for this level of responsibility, he said, finally. Take some time. Grow up. That was the breaking point. That night, I packed my bags and booked a flight to Singapore, where a college friend had offered me a role in his development firm. I vowed to build a future on my terms, and I did. In 5 years, I launched a dozen successful projects across Southeast Asia. I became known for thoughtful, community-oriented development. My work made headlines. I earned more money than I ever imagined. But the silence from home never lifted. Eventually, our calls faded to holiday greetings, then to nothing. I told myself he knew how to reach me if he wanted to. But Grace, my childhood friend, told a different story. He had tried. Diana intercepted everything. Emails, calls, even a letter that was never mailed. The morning after I returned to Maplewood, I walked into First National Bank the moment it opened. Box 247. The key from behind the Monte Cristo painting fit perfectly. Inside was a folder of legal documents, property deeds, trust papers, and a USB drive. I took it to a quiet cafe, plugged it in, and played the only video on the device. It was dated 6 months ago. Dad looked thinner, his face drawn, but his eyes still held that determined fire. Maxwell, he began, his voice steady. If you're watching this, I'm likely gone. First, I want to apologize. I let Diana come between us, and it's my greatest regret. But I never stopped planning for your future. He went on to explain everything. Over the past 3 years, he had quietly transferred ownership of Key Harrison Properties assets into my name legally and irrevocably. The Riverside development land, the commercial block downtown, the Maple Street apartment complexes. He'd done it all with the help of his oldest friend and business partner, Franklin Ross. The transfers were structured through trusts to avoid probate and Diana's reach. She doesn't know, he said, and she must never. After our argument, I saw her for what she was. I couldn't let her mold Tyler into a successor he wasn't meant to be. You were always the future, Max. I just took too long to protect that. He paused, visibly emotional. The will reading will be difficult. Diana thinks she owns everything, but you have what matters. Then, he smiled, the same proud smile I remembered from my childhood. Property is permanence, Maxwell. And now, it's yours. The official will left Diana the house and a few accounts, enough to preserve her lifestyle, but the heart of Harrison Properties was already mine. Franklin had ensured everything was airtight. The video ended, with my father gazing into the camera, his voice steady despite his frailty. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, son. Now come home and finish what we started together. The screen faded to black, and I sat in silence, tears blurring my vision. All this time, I'd thought I'd lost him when in truth, he'd been quietly safeguarding our legacy. Once I'd pulled myself together, I called Franklin Ross. Within the hour, I was in his office, where the grizzled man greeted me with a bear hug. About time you showed up, he said, clapping my back. Your dad was worried you'd never come home, not even after he was gone. He confirmed every word of the video. My father had legally transferred ownership of key assets to me through a patchwork of trusts and discreet sales. All binding, Franklin said, and done with precision. Then he gave me a grim look. Diana's going to lose her mind. She's already promised the Riverside property to Lawrence Blackwood. The name made my stomach turn. Blackwood was the antithesis of everything my father and I had built, cutting corners, flipping properties for fast cash, gutting neighborhoods in the process. What about the will reading? I asked. Franklin's mouth tightened. It's this afternoon. But Harold Stevenson, the family attorney, he's been in Diana's pocket for years. Your dad only kept him around to avoid raising alarms. Diana doesn't want you there. I tapped the edge of my briefcase where the original property deeds rested. Oh, I said calmly, I'll be there. Franklin chuckled darkly. Richard would have loved this. Said you had his timing for a dramatic entrance. As I stepped back into the streets of Maplewood, the weight of grief began to lift, replaced by something stronger, resolve. My father had trusted me with his legacy, and I would not fail him. Diana and her kids were about to learn that the Harrisons were not so easily erased. At Harrison Properties headquarters, Margaret Wilson, the company's longtime executive assistant, stood when I walked in. Her eyes widened, then softened into a smile of pure recognition. Maxwell Harrison, she said warmly, wrapping me in a hug. I was hoping you'd come back. The office had changed. Sleek, cold, sterile. Diana's fingerprints were everywhere. But Margaret's corner was untouched, still lined with file cabinets, fresh flowers, and old photos. I noticed several of me as a teenager, framed beside business awards and family portraits. He made me promise, Margaret said, lowering her voice as she handed me a second USB drive. Said I had to give this to you personally. I thanked her and asked about the company's condition. Her face fell. Things haven't been the same since Diana took over. Staff cuts, consultants. They gutted departments your father spent years building. And Tyler, she hesitated. He's got a VP title, but he rarely shows up. When he does, he undoes everything your father put in place. I asked about the Riverside project, careful not to reveal what I already knew. It's been redesigned. Entirely, she said bitterly. No affordable housing, no community center. It's high-end condos and boutique retail now. And Lawrence Blackwood's company is set to start construction next month. My jaw clenched. Diana was tearing apart everything Dad and I had envisioned. Can I see my father's office? I asked. Margaret hesitated. Diana cleared it out last week. Said she needed the space for the new marketing team. I'd still like to see it. She led me down the hallway. The room that had once pulsed with my father's energy maps on the wall, documents spread across a sturdy oak desk. The hum of decades of ambition was now a hollow shell. But standing there, I felt something else rise in me. Not grief, not rage, purpose. I took the second USB and walked to a quiet park nearby, away from the tension and noise. Sitting beneath a tree, I opened my laptop and watched. It was my father again, walking through different Harrison Properties locations, explaining their histories, their roles in his vision. The Riverside project is the most important, he said in one clip, standing on the banks of the empty waterfront. This isn't just development, it's restoration, legacy. I wanted to build something here that outlasts us both. There were videos like that for every major property. Plans, warnings, dreams. He hadn't just left me assets. He had left me a roadmap. This could transform Maplewood, my father said in one of the final videos, standing before the vacant waterfront lot. Create homes and opportunity for everyone, not just the wealthy. Diana never understood that a thriving town needs economic diversity, but my father did. And he'd entrusted the Riverside property to me because he believed I would honor that vision. In another clip, filmed in his office, he looked worn but resolute. I've followed your work in Asia, Max. The eco-housing in Malaysia, the mixed-use development in Vietnam. You took everything I taught you and made it better. You were right about where we should have gone. I was too easily swayed by Diana's obsession with luxury and appearances. By the time I finished all the recordings, I understood not only what he'd passed on to me but why. He hadn't just protected assets. He protected the soul of our work and made sure they would outlive him. My next stop was James Patterson, Dad's longtime accountant. James greeted me with a measured smile, ushering me into his quiet office above the pharmacy downtown. I've been expecting you, he said, closing the door. Your father left very clear instructions. I'm here to assist. In any way. James walked me through a meticulous web of financial arrangements. Not only had my father transferred property ownership, he'd also formed a new corporate entity, Harrison Legacy Holdings, and I was its sole owner. It's elegantly structured, James explained, pointing to a diagram of flowcharts and transactions. Diana thinks she's inheriting control of Harrison Properties, but most of its valuable assets were legally moved quietly and perfectly within the law into Legacy Holdings over the last 3 years. I felt a pang. Did he leave her nothing? James shook his head. Your father was fair. Diana keeps the house, a few investment accounts, and a steady income stream from select commercial properties. She won't struggle, but she won't hold the reins either. By noon, I had reviewed the documents, confirmed my legal standing, and organized everything into my briefcase. It was time. The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. I dressed in a charcoal gray suit and a blue silk tie, one my father had given me years ago. In my briefcase, property deeds, business records, proof of ownership, and most importantly, my father's final wishes. Before leaving, I made one last call. Grace answered on the second ring. Diana's been telling everyone you abandoned your father, she warned. She's playing the grieving widow like she's auditioning for a soap opera. Be ready for theatrics. I'm not here to humiliate her, I said. Grace paused. Okay, I amended. Maybe just a little. She laughed, then said more seriously, whatever happens today, Max, remember, your dad wanted you to come home. He wanted you to carry this forward. Fueled by her words, I walked into Harold Stevenson's law office 5 minutes early. It was located at the top of one of Maplewood's few skyscrapers, a 4-story building my father used to own, a building that now ironically belonged to me. The receptionist blinked in surprise when I gave my name. Oh, Mr. Harrison. Let me check with Mr. Stevenson. She disappeared, and moments later, Harold Stevenson appeared, flushed and clearly rattled. Maxwell, this is unexpected. Today's meeting is a private family matter, just a preliminary gathering. I am family, I said evenly. Richard Harrison's only son. Harold hesitated. Diana thought perhaps, given your estrangement, I'll be joining. And with that, I walked past him into the conference room. The room fell silent as I entered. Diana sat at the head of the table, draped in elegant black, her hair a perfect ash blonde wave. Brittany and Tyler flanked her like junior royalty. Across the table sat Dad's old banker, one of Diana's cousins, and a man I immediately recognized, Lawrence Blackwood's lawyer. Diana recovered first, masking her surprise with a smile as sharp as glass. Maxwell, she said, her voice syrupy with false civility. This is a surprise. I'm here for my father's will, I replied, calmly taking a seat directly across from her. Harold looked like he wanted to disappear. I wasn't aware Maxwell would be joining us today. This meeting is for heirs only, Diana snapped. Maxwell removed himself from this family years ago. I said nothing. I simply opened my briefcase and began placing folders of documentation on the table, one by one. Shall we begin? I said. Harold cleared his throat, glanced at Diana, then adjusted his glasses and began reading. We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Richard Allen Harrison. As he droned through the legal preamble, I studied the faces in the room. Diana kept up her tragic widow act, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Tyler checked his watch, visibly bored. Only Brittany looked shaken, her eyes puffy, mascara smudged. Then Harold reached the first distribution. To my wife, Diana Harrison, I leave our family home at 247 Maple Avenue, its contents, and the sum of $2 million. Diana barely reacted. It was clear this was the minimum she expected. To my stepdaughter, Brittany Winters, I leave the sum of $1 million and my collection of first edition books. Brittany blinked, her mouth parted slightly in surprise. I was surprised too. Those books had been my father's personal treasure. Harold continued. To my stepson, Tyler Winters, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my classic Cadillac. Tyler raised an eyebrow. He clearly expected more. Harold glanced at the last page in the folder before him. His voice grew slightly unsteady. And finally, to my son, Maxwell Harrison. Everyone leaned in. This wasn't the direction Dad had outlined in his letters and videos, but I kept quiet, waiting. To my stepson, Tyler Winters, Harold continued, I leave the sum of $1 million and my vintage car collection. Tyler smirked. He knew the value of Dad's cars. The 1965 Mustang alone was worth over $100,000. Then came the line that would change everything. As to my business interests, Harold Reed, Harrison Properties and all associated assets, I leave to, he hesitated, my son, Maxwell Harrison. The room fell utterly silent. Diana blinked, then let out a brittle laugh. That's impossible, she snapped. Richard changed his will 2 years ago. I was there. Harold looked deeply uncomfortable. There was a codicil filed 6 months ago, he admitted. It reversed those earlier changes. Diana turned red. You never mentioned this. I wasn't aware of it until yesterday, Harold replied stiffly. It was filed directly with the court by Richard. I received the certified copy just last night. It doesn't matter, Diana said, waving a manicured hand. I've been running Harrison Properties for the past year. The board will never accept Maxwell's leadership. He abandoned his responsibilities. This was my cue. I calmly opened my briefcase and placed several thick property folders onto the table, sliding them to the center. These are the deeds to the Riverside development, the downtown commercial block, the Maple Street apartments, and 12 other key properties, I said. You'll notice they're all in my name. Have been for quite some time. Diana snatched up the documents, her hands trembling as she scanned the pages. These must be fake. They're not, I replied evenly. Dad legally transferred ownership over the past 3 years. You can verify everything with the county records office. I allowed myself the kind of dramatic pause Dad would have enjoyed. You mean the properties I already own? Tyler shot up from his chair. You can't just waltz back in after 5 years and take everything. I'm not taking anything, I said, standing my ground. I'm claiming investment accounts, income from several rental properties. But Harrison Properties? That was his life's work. He wanted it protected. And he knew you were planning to sell it off, piece by piece. You have no right, Diana hissed. I was his wife. I cared for him while you were off chasing awards in Asia. I wanted to come back, I said quietly. I called for months. You told me he didn't want to speak to me. That's already mine what Dad wanted me to have. Diana had gone pale. Harold, is this legal? Can he do this? Harold, still examining the deeds, gave a reluctant nod. If Richard signed these over while he was alive, then they're no longer part of the estate. They're legally Maxwell's. What about Harrison Properties? Diana pressed. The will says the company goes to him, but that doesn't mean he controls the assets. Actually, I said, stepping in, most of the assets were transferred out of Harrison Properties last year into a new entity, Harrison Legacy Holdings. I'm the sole owner. The company is essentially a shell now. Chaos broke out. Tyler shouted about contesting the will. Diana threatened lawsuits against me, against Harold, maybe even against the furniture. Brittany remained quiet, watching me with something I couldn't quite read. When Diana finally burned through her rage, I spoke again, my voice calm but firm. Dad didn't cut you out. He left you financially secure. You have the house. A flicker of guilt passed over her face before it vanished behind her usual mask. He was disappointed in you. Then why did he leave me everything that mattered? I shot back. Why did he spend his final years building an elaborate legal plan to protect me and his legacy? Brittany finally spoke. Is it true? She asked. Did Mom keep you from speaking to him? Before Diana could answer, I nodded. According to his videos and letters, yes. He tried. More than once. Videos? Diana's voice cracked in panic. What videos? I patted my briefcase. Dad was thorough. He documented everything. His decisions, his reasons, even his hopes for the town. He knew about your deal with Blackwood, the condos, the cuts to staff, the disregard for community. And he left a record. Harold cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should adjourn. This is a lot to process, and there may be legal matters to address. Agreed, I said, collecting my documents. My attorneys will be in touch regarding the transition. In the meantime, I'd appreciate no further decisions be made without my approval. As I turned to leave, Diana's voice rang out, venomous. This isn't over, Maxwell. Your father wasn't in his right mind. We'll contest every last word. I paused at the door. You're welcome to try. But Dad didn't just leave me property and a company. He left me the truth. Are you sure you want that made public? The silence that followed was deafening. I stepped out into the sunlight with my head high and a weight lifted. I had honored my father's wishes. Now came the hard part, rebuilding what Diana had tried to dismantle and bringing to life the future my father and I had once imagined together. The next morning, Maplewood was buzzing. In a small town, news spreads faster than the internet. By the time I stopped into Bernard's bakery for a coffee, I'd already received a dozen looks, some congratulatory, others speculative. Your dad would be mighty pleased, Bernard said, handing me a cinnamon roll on the house. People were worried. Diana'd sell everything to outsiders. But you're your father's son. I smiled, quietly determined. This was just the beginning. I thanked Bernard and took a seat by the window, watching the slow, familiar rhythm of Main Street. In 5 years, Maplewood had barely changed, at least not as much as I had. The same storefronts lined the street, the courthouse still anchored the square, and despite Diana's best efforts to reshape it in her image, the town's spirit, its sense of community, remained intact. Grace slid into the seat across from me, uninvited as always, and plucked a piece of my cinnamon roll. "Congratulations, you're officially the town scandal," she said, grinning. "Diana's telling anyone who'll listen that you manipulated your father and that she's taking you to court." "Let her," I said. "Dad documented everything. He was sharp right up until the end." Grace's smile faded. "Be careful, Max. Diana's built a web of influence. And Blackwood? He's furious about losing the Riverside deal." Before I could answer, Franklin Ross appeared, dragging up a chair. "Morning, kids," he said, despite both of us being well into our 30s. "Heard there was a bit of theater yesterday." I filled him in on the aftermath: the will, Diana's outrage, her threats. Franklin waved it off. "Typical bluster. She knows her legal footing is weak. That doesn't mean she won't make trouble, though." "What kind of trouble?" I asked. "The kind that turns communities against you," he replied. "Diana spent the last 5 years making herself indispensable: charities, business, councils, school boards. She convinced people her version of Maplewood's future was the only one." "Selling everything to Blackwood isn't a future," I said. "It's a liquidation. Most people don't know that," Grace chimed in. "All they see are those glossy mock-ups, riverfront bistros, upscale shops. They don't understand what it would cost." The rest of my day was a whirlwind of meetings at Harrison Properties. I sat down with staff, reassured them their jobs were safe, and made my intentions clear. This was about rebuilding, not gutting. Most were relieved. Under Diana, it seemed fear had been her management tool of choice. Margaret had already organized the key documents, giving me a brutal look at the company's financial health. It wasn't good. Cash reserves drained, deferred, maintenance, prime properties lined up for underpriced sales. She was stripping the company for parts, Margaret said bluntly. If you'd waited even another month, the implication didn't need to be spoken. That night, I returned to the house, technically Diana's now, though I was still using the guest room until I found something else. The atmosphere was as cold as the marble tiles in the entryway. Diana avoided me. Tyler slammed every door he passed, but it was Brittany who knocked on my door after dinner. "Can we talk?" she asked, visibly nervous. I let her in, curious. We had never been close. She'd always mirrored Diana's chilly distance, though never openly hostile. She sat awkwardly, fidgeting. I wanted to apologize for how things went with. She hesitated, then corrected herself. "With Richard." I raised an eyebrow at her choice of words. "He was more your dad than ours," she admitted. "Tyler pretended to care, but all he ever wanted was the money. Me? I just wanted a family. But Mom, she always made it about Tyler, about control. I didn't know how to stop it." Her voice was soft, sincere. I stayed quiet. "I'm telling you this now because I found something." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket. After the will reading, I started digging. I needed to know what Richard really thought. She handed me the worn journal. It was my father's. His handwriting filled the pages. Thoughts about the business, his illness, his regrets, his growing suspicions of Diana. "He missed you," Brittany said gently. He was starting to see through her. I flipped through the entries: meeting notes, reflections on me, on the town, on the pressure he felt from Diana and Blackwood. "Does your mother know you took this?" "She would lose it." "But I thought you should have it." "It proves what?" "You've been saying he wanted you to come back, to take over." I studied her. "Why show me this?" "You're giving me a weapon against your mom." "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply. "And because I want to stay in Maplewood. I love this town. I don't want to see it ruined by her or by a family war." Before I could respond, shouting erupted downstairs. We rushed down. Diana and Tyler stood face to face with a woman I didn't recognize, though her resemblance to my father was unmistakable. "You have no right to be here," Diana was shrieking. "Richard never acknowledged you." The woman's eyes shifted. "To me, you must be Maxwell," she said, calm despite the chaos. "I'm Alice. Alice Thornton. Richard was my father too." The air left the room. "That's a lie," Diana spat. "A con for money." "I don't want money," Alice said. "Richard and I had a relationship, quiet, private, at my request. I came to pay my respects and meet my brother. She extended her hand. Her eyes were exactly like Dad's, clear, cautious, but hopeful. I took it. Diana turned away with a noise of disgust. Come on, Tyler. Brittany hovered a moment longer, then slipped away. Alice and I were alone. This isn't how I imagined meeting you, she said. Nothing about this week has gone according to plan, I replied with a tired smile. But I'd like to hear about you. About him. We moved to the living room. She spoke of her mother's brief relationship with my father, her discovery of his identity later in life, and how Dad had quietly welcomed her into his world. He was proud of you, she said, even when he missed you terribly. Grief and gratitude flooded me. There were still pieces of my father's life I was only just beginning to understand. And now, more than ever, I was determined to protect the legacy he had worked so hard to build. Later that night, I was back in the guest room, reviewing financial statements when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. We need to talk. This isn't over. L.B. Lawrence Blackwood. I stared at the message. The battle for my father's legacy and the future of Maplewood was just getting started. Maxwell, the old way of doing things is dying, Diana said coolly. Richard realized that near the end. Did he? I asked, pulling out my phone. I tapped the screen and played one of Dad's final videos, his own words stating clearly that Diana didn't understand his true vision for the Riverside development. Diana's face darkened. He was sick, confused. Confused men don't legally transfer all their key assets and document their reasons for doing so, I replied. The meeting ended in a stalemate. Diana stormed out, her lawyer muttering promises of legal action. But the weeks passed, and no lawsuit came. Franklin later told me her legal team had advised against it. Her case was paper thin. In the meantime, I got to know Alice. Unlike Diana's children, Alice had no stake in the family business. She was a professor of environmental science in Colorado, passionate about conservation. Her insights inspired me to redesign Riverside to include sustainability features, green roofs, community gardens, native landscaping. When I showed her the updated plans, she smiled. Dad would have loved this, she said. He always cared about the environment. Diana just didn't want to spend the money. To my surprise, Brittany had become an invaluable ally. She distanced herself from Diana's manipulations, moved into an apartment downtown, and shared insights into her mother's dealings that helped me untangle the damage. Mom's selling everything, she told me over coffee one day. Jewelry, art, even furniture. I think she's planning to leave Maplewood. Tyler remained belligerent but increasingly isolated. As rumors swirled about his role in Diana's shady decisions, even his longtime friends kept their distance. The real shift happened at a packed town council meeting when I unveiled the revised Riverside plan. Gone were the luxury condos and boutique stores Diana and Blackwood had envisioned. In their place, affordable housing, local business space, a community center, and open waterfront access. This is the development my father wanted, I told the room. Something for all of Maplewood, not just the privileged few. Blackwood, seated in the front row with a sleek slideshow countered with tax revenue projections and luxury appeal. But the mood shifted when residents began pressing him about housing costs and public access. This plan protects what makes Maplewood unique, Grace said from the audience. Blackwood's plan just makes us another overpriced resort town. The vote was unanimous. The council backed my plan. As I left, Blackwood caught up to me outside, his expression tight. You win this round, Harrison, he said. But I've been in this game longer than you. I can wait. Or you could adapt, I offered. There's room for your firm if you're willing to work within a community-centered model. He blinked, caught off guard. Why offer that? Because you're good at what you do, I said honestly. And Dad always believed that a smart businessman could do well by doing good. We didn't strike a deal that night, but the door was open. The final confrontation with Diana wasn't in a courtroom. It happened quietly, in the garden behind the house I was finally leaving. She was sitting alone on the stone bench near my mother's roses, looking older, smaller. I'm leaving Maplewood, she said when she noticed me. There's nothing for me here. I sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. Where will you go? Back to Connecticut. My sister's there. She glanced over. You've won, Maxwell. The company, the town, even Brittany. Does it feel like victory? It was never about winning, I said. It was about honoring Dad and doing what's right for the town. She was quiet for a moment. He changed after you left, grew distant. I thought if I got involved in the business, it would bring us closer. And then you fell in love with the power. She didn't argue. I'm not sorry for wanting security. When you've had nothing, you do what it takes to make sure it never happens again. I studied her. Flawed, manipulative but human, shaped by fear as much as greed. Dad left you the house, investments. You didn't need to try and take everything. Need has little to do with it, she said simply. Then she stood. I've told my attorney to drop all objections. In return, I expect you to honor the provisions made for me and my children. I already planned to. She nodded once. Goodbye, Maxwell. I doubt we'll see each other again. As she walked away, I felt no triumph, just relief. And something like grief. The family I'd hoped for when Dad remarried had never come to be. But something new had taken root. The next morning, I met with the Harrison Properties team to officially launch the Riverside project. Brittany, now part of our marketing team, sat at the conference table beside Alice and Margaret. My father used to say property is permanence. I told them, what we build here will outlast all of us. Let's make it something Maplewood can be proud of for generations. As the meeting ended, Grace approached. Your dad would be proud, Max. I nodded. I think so too. And this is just the beginning. 1 year later, I stood on the observation deck overlooking the now bustling Riverside site. The first buildings had risen mixed income, housing around a green park. The community center's frame stretched toward the river. The business incubator was under construction. Quite a view, said Franklin, joining me at the railing. Richard would have loved this. I wish he could see it, I said. He does, Franklin replied, nodding toward the bronze plaque by the entrance, Richard Harrison Memorial Park. That year had changed everything. I'd put down roots, built partnerships, learned to lead not just as a developer, but as a citizen of Maplewood. The scholarship committee approved all 15 applicants, Alice said, appearing with her tablet. She'd moved to Maplewood 6 months earlier to help launch the Richard Harrison Foundation, which offered education grants for students interested in sustainable development. Perfect, I said. The internship program starts next month. We've already got partnerships with 3 universities. Through Alice, I'd learned more about my father than I ever had growing up: his anonymous donations, his environmental work, his support of local entrepreneurs. He never wanted recognition, Alice once said. He just wanted to leave things better than he found them. And that's what I aim to do. Blackwood and his allies still fought us on every progressive policy, but progress was happening. And often, it was Brittany who helped navigate those politics. She had a natural instinct for Maplewood's social chessboard. Lawrence is planning to oppose the affordable housing expansion at next week's meeting, she warned one afternoon. He's been working behind the scenes. Suggestions? She smiled. I've invited a few residents from Phase 1 to speak. Let Lawrence argue against them. At HQ, Margaret greeted me with a stack of paperwork. Among it, final documents severing Diana's last TIs to the company. She agreed to sell her minority shares in exchange for a lump sum, Margaret said. Have you heard from her? No, I said. Brittany says she's remarried, living in Greenwich, reinventing herself as a philanthropist. I felt no anger. Diana had acted true to herself just as my father had, in the end. The Richard Harrison I'd come to know through videos, journals, and memories was more than the man I'd once misunderstood. He was strategic, compassionate, forgiving. And above all, he believed in the future. As I handed Margaret the signed papers, she reminded me, "You've got dinner with Grace at 7. I smiled. Maplewood was no longer just a chapter in my story. It was home. And don't forget, Margaret called as I left the conference room. The Historical Society wants an answer about the old mill property by tomorrow. I thanked her and headed to my office, my father's office. Once I'd restored it to something close to how he'd kept it, but with my own touches now layered in. The Monte Cristo painting still hung in its original spot, though the hidden key was long gone. The shelves were lined with photographs not just of Dad and me, but of Alice, Brittany, Grace, and others who had become part of my life and legacy. The most meaningful addition sat framed on the credenza, a short note I'd found among my father's belongings. Property is permanence, but legacy is in people. That note had reshaped the way I saw everything. Even Tyler and I had come to a kind of peace. After months of sullen silence and passive aggression, he finally approached me not with apologies, but with a business idea. He wanted to open a high-end restaurant in one of our downtown properties. Margaret had warned me not to entertain it. He has no work ethic, she muttered. He'll screw it up. But I'd taken a chance. Offered him favorable lease terms. To everyone's surprise, including mine, the restaurant took off. Tyler, it turned out, had a real gift for hospitality. Diana had always looked down on that world too lowbrow for her sensibilities, but Tyler had found his place. We weren't close, and probably never would be, but we were civil, and that was enough. As the sun dipped behind the river, I made one last call to the administrator of the scholarship program I'd created in my mother's name. Supporting young women in architecture had been one of my earliest initiatives after reclaiming the company. The first recipients graduate this spring, she told me. Several have already inquired about internships at Harrison Properties. After hanging up, I sat quietly, reflecting on how far I'd come since that rainy morning in Singapore the day the call came. My father was gone. I had returned to Maplewood full of anger, wounded pride, and a determination to claim what was mine. But somewhere along the way, that fight became something greater. It wasn't just about reclaiming assets. It was about restoring a vision, a legacy, a name. I thought back to the dramatic will reading, the moment I had placed the property deeds on the table. It had felt like a victory then, but real satisfaction came later through the relationships rebuilt, the trust regained, the town strengthened. That evening, I met Grace at our favorite restaurant. She greeted me with a smile that still, after everything, made the world feel right. Over the past year, our friendship had deepened, slowly and naturally, into something more. She had been my compass through the chaos, grounding me in this new Maplewood, helping me rediscover what mattered. The view from the riverside lookout is incredible at sunset, I told her as we sat down. Show me after dinner, she said, teasing. I nodded, already thinking of the bottle of champagne chilling at home and the ring in my pocket, waiting for the right moment. As we ate, I couldn't help but think about everything that had led to this night. My father's death had brought me home, but what I'd truly inherited wasn't land or money. It was the opportunity to become a better version of myself. Diana had seen the company as a source of status and control. She had never understood the heart of what my father built. She saw properties as assets. He saw them as anchors for people, for dreams, for community. Later, Grace and I walked hand in hand along the riverfront beneath a sky slowly shifting to violet. The air was cool, calm, alive with the scent of spring. What are you thinking? She asked, sensing my quiet. Legacy, I replied. What we leave behind, how we're remembered. She squeezed my hand. Well, your dad would be proud of everything you've done, everything you're still doing. I nodded, thinking of the man I had come to understand better in death than I had in life. He hadn't been perfect, none of us were, but he had tried, and in the end, he had made sure his legacy would endure. We reached the riverside observation deck, overlooking the development that would define Maplewood's next chapter. I turned to Grace, the ring burning in my pocket, my future rising around us in steel and sunlight and community spirit. This was where I belonged, not just as Richard Harrison's son, but as my own man, building on the past, creating the future. What about you? Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours against opposition, against doubt, even against family? Or face the choice between justice and reconciliation? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more true stories about inheritance, family, and the values that shape who we become. Because sometimes the most meaningful legacy isn't written in wills or deeds, but in the lives we touch and the choices we make.